A very good afternoon and welcome to The Ambassador, where we debunk global diplomacy and geopolitics. I am your Ambassador Susan Nganga. On our today's Fact Check segment, we'll be talking about the future of Syria. But first, let's get the top stories. Authorities in Khartoum, Sudan have retrieved at least 11 bodies, including women and children, from the bottom of a well. This discovery follows the military expelling a notorious paramilitary group from the area. The ongoing conflict in Sudan continues to have a devastating impact on civilians, with widespread suffering and displacement across the country. Here's more on that scene by Teresa Tiango.
Sudanese authorities have discovered 11 bodies, including those of women and children, at the bottom of a well in the Fire neighborhood of Khartoum. The search for more remains continues after residents alerted authorities about a body found in the well. Officials believe the victims were killed and discarded by the Rapid Support Forces, where they controlled the area prior to the military regaining control earlier this month.
We found this mass grave inside this well. The injuries were caused by gunshots. The entry and the exit points of the bullets were there. While in some cases, it's bone fractures because of the fall, so they were throwing people into the well.
The discovery follows numerous reports from residents who claim the RSF killed many people in the region, leaving their bodies on the streets. The ongoing conflict in Sudan has led to at least 20,000 deaths and displaced over 14 million people, with parts of the country facing famine. The violence, which has escalated in the recent months, include mass rape and ethnically targeted killings, particularly in Darfur, and has been classified as war crimes by the United Nations and international human rights organizations. Teresa Tiango, GBS News.
Let's shift the focus to South Sudan. Now, South Sudan, where sexual assault is a constant threat, many survivors face severe barriers to receiving timely help. An Israeli aid group, Israel, is using a WhatsApp chatbot to help bridge this gap, enabling survivors to report incidents anonymously and receive assistance quickly. However, challenges like low mobile access, stigma, and limited resources complicate the effectiveness of this digital solution. Here's more on that report.
In South Sudan, sexual assault remains a constant risk for women, with survivors often facing significant barriers to accessing help. One such survivor, a 28-year-old woman, was gang raped by armed men while gathering firewood, but was unable to get timely medical care due to closed clinics, lack of funds, and the fear of further mistreatment. I went to fetch firewood in the bush near the Juba displacement site, and I was raped by strangers. When I came to the health center, there was community worker who I told my story to, but they told me that they are closing, and the person who could help me is not around, and it was on Friday. I came back on Monday, but still did not get help. I then got pregnant and became hopeless because I have a child from a stranger as a result of lacking money to take myself to the hospital. I want to tell the world about how we are enduring a lot of difficulties in these camps. An Israel aid group, Israel Aid, is attempting to bridge this gap by using technology by piloting a WhatsApp chatbot that helps survivors report incidents. The bot immediately alters a social worker, aiming to provide assistance within hours.
Information that you enter into the phone reaches the caseworker immediately, and then you just have to refer the person to the center, and immediately the person will be received because the information is already given.
I'm very happy to have been given this opportunity to share my story, and will be happy if you share it with the rest of the world. I'm a man who was raped by his wife, and that resulted in her getting pregnant with twins. She's given birth in this crisis where I'm unable to bring anything on the table, and it's led to more suffering. I'm begging everyone in the world to join hands and help us as displaced people who have no means of income to feed our children.
Despite its potential, this initiative faces challenges, as South Sudan has one of the lowest rates of mobile access and connectivity in the world, with many people lacking reliability internet access and literacy. Furthermore, the stigma surrounding sexual assault make it difficult for survivors to seek help, especially in remote displacement camps like those in Juba. Paris Kigo, GBS News.
Let's shift the focus to the Democratic Republic of Congo now. In a major setback for the peace efforts in the country, the M23 rebel group has announced its withdrawal from planned peace talks with the Congolese government in Luanda, Angola. The rebels have cited European sanctions on their members as the reason behind their decision, further complicating an already fragile peace process in the region. Erin Juguna reports.
The M23 rebel group, made up of the ethnic Tutsi fighters, has pulled out of peace negotiations with the Congolese government scheduled to take place in Luanda, Angola. The group spokesperson, Lawrence Kanyuka, expressed deep regret over the decision, blaming the imposition of European Union sanctions on key M23 members as the driving factor behind their withdrawal. In a statement released Monday evening, Kanyuka condemned the actions of international institutions, calling the sanctions unjust and counterproductive. The M23, which has been involved in a violent conflict with the DRC government in the eastern provinces for years, accuses the coalition forces of escalating tensions and worsening the situation. This move by the M23 is seen as a major setback for the ongoing peace efforts in the region, where both Congolese and international forces have been working to mediate a long-lasting solution to the violence. The European Union's decision to impose sanctions on several individuals linked to the conflict, including M23 leaders and key figures in Rwanda's gold refinery industry, has added fuel to the fire, raising concerns of further destabilization in the region. As of now, there are growing fears that without M23's participation in the peace talks, efforts to end the violence in eastern Congo may face even greater challenges. Reporting for GBS News, Irene Juguna.
European leaders scramble to save Radio-Free Europe after United States funding cuts, with President Trump slashing support for the historical broadcaster. The European Union warns it may struggle to keep it running. Journalists continue reporting, but the future still remains uncertain.
Its funding. However, EU officials warn that replacing the lost funds may be difficult. Radio Liberty, a US-funded news outlet, was created during the Cold War to provide independent news to countries with restricted media. It broadcasts in Iran, Russia, Belarus, Ukraine, and other regions. On Friday, Trump signed an Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallis admitted it will be a challenge.
Now the question for us is, can we come in with our funding to leave the or fill the void that US is leaving? The answer to that question is that not automatically, because we have a lot of organizations who are coming with the same request.
Radio Free Europe President Stephen Kappas called the funding cut a massive gift to America's enemies. Despite the uncertainty, Radio Free Europe Liberty journalists continued working, publishing stories on Monday. Vivian Scalabo, GBS News.
A federal judge is demanding answers from the Trump administration after it defied a court order that blocked the deportation of alleged Venezuelan gang members. The administration use of the 18th Century Alien Enemies Act has raised concerns, and the judge has given the Justice Department a deadline to explain its actions. Here's more on that report.
A United States federal judge is questioning the Trump administration's decision to continue deporting alleged Venezuelan gang members despite a court order intended to halt the deportations. The judge has given the Justice Department until Tuesday to provide further details on why the administration ignored his order. The deportations took place over the weekend, with over 200 Venezuelans being sent to El Salvador. The White House defended the move, claiming the deportees were members of a criminal group with alleged ties to violence and trafficking.
This administration acted within the confines of the law, again, within the president's constitutional authority and under the authority granted to him under the Alien Enemies Act.
However, the administration's use of the 18th Century Alien Enemies Act to justify the deportations has raised legal questions.
Had serious concerns going into the day that the government violated a federal court order. Today did nothing to dispel it. If anything, it reinforced that our view that the government may very well have violated this order, perhaps even knowingly violated. The president is simply thumbing his nose at Congress. Congress has said when you can use the Alien Enemies Act.
The Trump administration maintains it acted within its constitutional authority, defending the deportations as necessary under the powers granted by the Alien Enemies Act. As tensions over the issue continue to rise, the court will now review the administration's justification for its actions. Reporting for GBS News, Irene Juguna.
And that's all for now on our current segment. We'll be back for the fact check segment after this break, where we'll be talking about the future of Syria. Stay tuned and we'll be back with even more.
Are you all happy to see me? Yes, I'm also very happy to see you. We're going to make, ta-da, a banana milk package. We're done with the banana milk
How is it for you as a parent? Are you having an adolescent? How is parenting for you?
But again, we have to be fair, firm, and friendly. We cannot parent without being friendly to these children. It's peer pressure not to be pure. Where the adolescents, they have a slogan, Mavajuni Fara. Parents, you have to be hot, raw, real, and nice.
How do we help our children to understand we are not from the West and we can never be the West? The reason as to why I'm bringing this out is because
we have to understand the trends. Because they tend to trade with what is trading. We have to be able to understand and tell our children, just because it is trading doesn't make it a trade.
But let's continue this conversation online across all our social media networks. That's GBS TV Africa. Our SMS line is 21144.
What is always before you but can't be seen?
Kudiscover talent.
Kudiscover. Ulijuangaje like unaweza imba like yeah.
Kini Trace Jumi Kipchoge kwa ngoma na mfala wananidis na wanabonga kwa ngoma, mafanjo wananipenda ndo nazidi kwa roga, wenye walenjaribu mazee walishachoka na nikozabe meditation naendelesha generation niliofanya kalki.
Wewe at 1 year old ulikuwa unafanya nini? Your feeling the vibe. Ulitoa a few days ago, unaweza taka utuambie like ulikuwa unafikiria nini when you came up with the lyrics? Yeah.
So I'm doing my thing. Don't try and stop me when I'm doing my thing. I'm trying to boss, let me do my thing. And if you're trying to win, you can be on my team. Yeah, so I'm doing my thing. Don't try and stop me when I'm doing my thing. I'm trying to boss, let me do my thing.
You feel like you're young at heart, I'm an old soul. If you could only listen to one singer or band for the rest of your life, who will you choose?
Yeah, because we are here to entertain and educate at the same time. So the question of the day, have you ever benefited from any youth-led initiative?
What pushed me to get into the ground, one, was born HIV positive, by the way. So when I was born HIV positive, I felt like the society and the youth need to be educated much on about the HIV and HIV management.
Someone was confessing and alikuwa anasema like yeye ako HIV positive, ni student, but yeye badala ya ajue venye atasaidia wengine, yana try venye atasambaza.
Unajua pia kitu kingine yenye natusumbua sisi mayouth ni kiburi. You don't want to learn, unaona?
Yeah.
Be there to learn. My youth are doing things that they are not supposed to do. Kwa sababu anataka kitu yenye iko beyond yeye. Iko beyond haezi afford. Unaona, manze mimi nataka kubamba wase kuchafua meza, kukuwa na dem sijui mwenye anakaaje, ndio at least wase wa feel like mimi nimeweza. Manze mimi hiyo ya kuweza, acha tuweze ki mindset. Na pia uset goals. Kama una goals manze kwa hii life sijui penye. Ni kama tu yani you should live with a purpose, not in purpose. Unajua most of us are living in purpose whereby yani wewe uko tu manze. Hata unataka kukatia dema na kuambia nini ati mimi niko tu. What is mimi niko?
Everywhere, GBS.
Welcome back to the Fact Check segment. Now, where we'll be talking about the future of Syria. Ever since Syria's former President Bashar al-Assad was ousted, many were cautiously optimistic about the country's future, hoping for democracy where freedom of thought and expression could thrive. However, recent developments, including the rise of insurgent groups, border clash with Hezbollah, and Israeli airstrikes, have raised serious questions about Syria's path forward. Here's Abdi Hamid Ali that brings us the report on the Syria's future.
Last December, a group called Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, led by Ahmed al-Sharra, captured major cities, which forced Assad to seek refuge in Russia. This shift in power has led the European Union to lift some of its restrictive sanctions. But despite the moves, Syria's economy remains in ruins. Just last week, Syria witnessed a significant uptick in insurgency when pro-Assad loyalists clashed with interim government forces in western Syria. These clashes, part of an attempt to restore Assad's power, have left over 1,000 people dead, the majority being civilians from the Alawite villages. The new interim president al-Sharra now faces a monumental challenge in uniting a deeply divided country. Syria's ethnic and religious fractures, spanning Sunni Muslims, Alawites, Shia Islam, Christians, and Dursi, complicate efforts to centralize power. President Ahmed al-Sharra has signed a constitutional declaration calling for equality, freedom of speech, and women's rights. However, divisions within the military, where Arabs control 50% and Sunni Muslim make up 74% of the military, underscores the difficult road ahead. In a historic move, the Syrian government signed a joint military treaty with the Kurdish Syrian Democratic Forces to integrate with the Syrian military and govern northeastern Syria. Yet significant challenges remain, such as the ongoing threat of ISIS and tensions with neighboring Israel, which has launched recent airstrikes in Damascus and continues to occupy the Golan Heights. Additionally, Hezbollah militias backed by Iran have clashed with Syrian forces along the Lebanese border. The Syrian government accused Hezbollah of killing 3 soldiers. Hezbollah played a role during the Syrian civil war, in which the group helped the former president capture cities under rebel control, like Aleppo in 2016, making the clash between the two groups personal. As Syria's interim government strives for stability, equality, and economic recovery, the path forward remains uncertain, with deep-rooted issues complicating any meaningful resolution. This is Abdihamid Ali, GBS News.
To debunk more on that story, we are joined by 2 guests, where we have our correspondent Abdihamid Ali and Dr. Naif. I'll give them like 30 seconds to introduce themselves. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Susan. My name is Abdihamid Ali. I'm a reporter from GBS News. I specialize in Middle East and Asian affairs.
Doctor.
Thank you so much, Susan. It's nice being here again. And so I'm Naif Al-Bidh. I'm a lecturer of history and politics. I specialize in philosophy of history, international relations, secessions. And yeah, glad to be back. Hope to contribute more to this talk.
Welcome back, Doctor. Now, we are talking about the future of Syria and the recent insurgent attacks that happened in the coastal town of Latakia, where pro-Assad is the leadership of the former dictator. Doctor, how does the recent attack affect the interim government's capability to maintain control, Doctor?
Well, Syria, as Abdi just mentioned in that report, is quite a diverse country. I mean, it's one with a really diverse history. I'd like to see Syria as the crossroads of the world. And if we view Syria as the crossroads of the world, we can also view it as the crossroads of history. And if we're going through a new phase in history right now, Syria, I think, is going to play a big role in this new phase that we're going to be entering globally. So Syria could be seen as the intersection or the junction of history as a whole. So Syria's ethnic divide and ethnic diversity is it's one that plays a big role in its national character as a whole. Now, the recent events that occurred show you the negative side of having such a diverse country in terms of ethnic diversity or religious diversity. So as Abdi just mentioned in the report, we have Alawites in Syria that played a big role with the Assad government the past decades. We have a Sunni majority as well. We have Shia Muslims. We have Kurds as another ethnic group existent over there. We have Turks in some specific regions as a minority. We have Turkey eyeing parts of northern Syria for quite a long time, almost a century now. And it's been ruling. Turkey plays a big role and it has been ruling Syria for quite a long time, since Ottoman history kind of reveals. Now, the tensions that occurred reveal to us the opposite side of the coin, a dark side of the of how a very diverse country could go astray and could lead to very volatile situations and eventually, in worst case scenarios, ethnic cleansings. Now, in one of the reports you just mentioned now concerning Sudan, you mentioned how mass graves are being found on the regular following the recent conflict that has erupted in Sudan. So Syria is kind of witnessing something similar right now. I think CNN had a report yesterday discussing a potential mass graves that have been located through Google Maps and satellite imaging. So again, it's quite a volatile situation right now in Syria. It's quite a volatile future ahead. Now, it's still unpredictable, I think, and I think many would agree that it's still unpredictable to see where this is going. But this reveals to us, the dark side of having an ethnically diverse country with no plausible solution ahead.
Doctor, now Ahmed al-Sharaa is the interim leader of Syria after his group, the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, overthrew the Assad regime. In your opinion, do you think Ahmed Sharaa is committed to political and economic reforms in Syria, Doctor?
Well, it depends what we mean by political and economic reforms. One thing that we have to keep in mind is the history of Syria as a whole is the ruling party and what that party was revealing in terms of what that party was using as an economic form. The Ba'ath Party was more socialist in its economic approaches, you could say, rather than fully fledged capitalist. Many Arabs could go and study in Syria for a long time until just recently for free. It's quite a different country. I wouldn't call it a Marxist economy, but it's rather a socialist economy. Now, one thing that Sharaa mentioned in one of the interviews recently is his interest in moving Syria towards a capitalist economy, which is quite interesting. Now, he does also take into consideration the Islamic perspective, and he also discussed the possibility of infusing a capitalistic approach with an Islamic approach. Now, he didn't specify too much on this, but he's definitely gonna reform the economy away from the approach that the Ba'ath Party had concerning the economy the past couple of years. Now, of course, the Ba'ath Party the past decades was, to a degree, a socialist approach towards economics. It was a socialist party, and thus it applied a socialist approach to economics. Now, that being said, it still was a kleptocratic state at its late stage, and there was a lot of corruption. Many cronies close to the Assad government, many individuals close to the Assad government were eventually ruled by kleptocracy, ruled by theft in a sense, and gained a lot of riches and power through government ties. Now, that being said, now in terms of political reforms, if anyone, I think that you mentioned the sense of optimism initially in Syria and how everyone's being optimistic right now, I think globally concerning what the shift that have been occurring in Syria in the recent developments. Now, that being said, I think I don't see I'm quite pessimistic, I think, and I don't see a very concrete solution ahead now. I don't say it's quite difficult to see that right now when it comes to Syria. I don't, in terms of reforms, one thing that, for instance, is quite clear now is the lack of decentralization within the political system or system of governance. We mentioned how diverse Syria was. And I think what goes alongside that diversity is a form of federalism usually, or a decentralized system of governance. This doesn't seem to be the case with the current Syrian government, with Ahmed Sharaa. Is he going to maybe perhaps think about this in the next coming months and consider a federal form of government? Perhaps so, but so far it doesn't seem to be the case. Even Turkey seems to be calling for a move away from federalism. I think this is considering the fact that the Kurds are bordering them. The Kurds in Syria border the Turkish borders, and federalism would empower the Kurds rather than remove power from them. Now, there were recent talks of an agreement between the Kurds and the Syrian government. These talks haven't led to any fruition of specific developments, but again, it's a significant development nevertheless.
Much, Doctor, for your in-depth analysis of Susan's question. Now, Ahmed al-Sharaa signed a military treaty with the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces. So how does this treaty affect Syria's geopolitical landscape?
So Öcalan recently, the leader of the PKK, recently had a shift in rhetoric, we could call it, within Turkey, calling for the putting down of arms, which is not quite typical of him to actually say. Now, many are pointing towards Turkish intelligence being involved in such shift in rhetoric. Perhaps there could be a deal in a sense. Now, one thing is certain, though, is the fact that Turkey is being more involved within Syria's future. If we can call the Iranian order on the Crescent and the Levant regions and Iraq being destroyed right now, if you can say that possibly, then the Turkish era is beginning, perhaps. And one thing that necessitates is to control the Kurdish areas, or at least have leverage over the Kurds, who are always posing a threat to Turkey. So the recent talks are quite an interesting development. I think it was unexpected by many. No one expected such developments to happen this fast. Is it a form of assurance to ensure that no form of violence and borderline ethnic cleansing occurs between the current government and insurgents linked to the government with the Kurds in northeast Syria, considering what happened in the northwest Syria, in the coastal areas in Latakia? Could it be that? I mean, it's still, we can't judge too early. These specific talks haven't materialized in anything concrete yet. But one thing is for sure is they have thawed the tensions between these two groups, between the government on one hand, the HTS, and the Turkish forces, the Kurdish forces, my bad. Now, again, Turkey is playing a big role here, definitely. Turkey has always been eyeing that specific region of Syria. Ever since the First World War, they've been eyeing that specific region. Now, there is a shift in the PKK rhetoric and tone as well. That's one of the goals of Turkey, is to ensure that that specific group is under control and to be eradicated as well. Now, removing, and back to the talks of federalism, and I think this is what people need to take into consideration when discussing solutions for Syria in the next coming years. It's one of federalism. We need to consider federalism, we need to consider autonomous zones. These specific talks have talked about integrating the Kurdish forces into the Syrian army, and these are quite catastrophic. They could lead to potentially catastrophic implications considering what occurred in the coastal regions this past couple of weeks. Now, so these, again, it's still unpredictable, but there's a lot of implication for catastrophe here.
Doctor, you talked about Turkey being involved in the fall in Syria. What role did the countries like the United States, Israel, play in the fall of the Assad regime, Doctor?
So the Assad regime was I mean, it's one of the oldest functioning regimes in the region for quite a long time, and a staunch enemy of the US and the West for quite a long time as well. Bashar al-Assad's father, Hafez al-Assad, has established ties with Iran that goes back to the beginning of his rule. So this is more than 2-3 decades back, and it has led to and materialized in an era where Iran is dominant within that region as a whole. So that's Iraq to Syria, Lebanon, and even parts of Palestine to a degree. They exerted influence over there. So the question is here, what was the role of USA and Europe in the sense? I mean, the Irani access or the Iranian resistance has collapsed the past couple of weeks and the past couple of months. Now, do we actually, I don't think people understand the implications of this specifically. I mean, George Galloway recently said that the collapse of the resistance and the collapse of the Assad regime is a big loss for Palestine, and that is one thing to take into consideration. Now, the US supporting Israel throughout the specific war against Iran and the tensions with the Iranian proxies, I think reflects the fact that the US was definitely involved in removing any elements of the old Iranian hegemony within the region as a whole. I think this is changing right now. Currently, we're seeing Turkey being involved. The US is not being involved literally with the specific government. They definitely had a role in the downfall of Assad, however. But do they have the significant close ties like Europe has currently with the HTS? I don't think so. But even Europe can't be said to have actually close ties, even though they're actually being involved in supporting the new government with aid packages. Now, there's a lot to be said about this, but definitely the West had a big role in eliminating Assad and the Assad regime as a whole. This is quite clear. And now the schism between the US and Europe, and I think this is something we can get onto and get more into later on, is the schism between Europe and the USA currently is reflected, and the divide between them is reflected in their approaches the different approaches to Syria currently. So there's a lot going on here. There's definitely a lot going on.
Now, thank you, Doctor. As you know, last week we talked about the crisis in Gaza and West Bank. Now, recent reports emerged that, as you know, the US and Israel are now looking to countries like Sudan, Somalia, and even Syria to displace Palestinians. Do you think Ahmed al-Shara will accept to displace Palestinians in Syria?
On last week's segment, we discussed how the current age of international politics we're heading towards is one based on zero-sum games, one based on real politics and one based on power dynamics. And if you don't have any power and leverage, as Trump says, you don't have the card. That's what he told Zelensky. It's a kind of, I think, a gist to where we're going, where we're heading in terms of international politics. If Ahmed al-Shara does not have the power to resist these specific talks of pushing Palestinians towards Syria, then I think that would possibly happen. I think Israel has bombed and has led airstrikes on Damascus the past couple of weeks, and I think the last couple of days as well, and there was no retaliation or reply back. This is, I think, a glimpse of what could occur here as well. Now, as far as pushing towards African countries, Palestinian refugees all the way there, it's quite tough due to the isolated, the lack of proximity to those specific lands. There were talks of Jordan and Egypt as well, and I think it's the same case with those specific countries as well. Even though many are calling for, many are warning of the rising tensions between Egypt and Israel at this specific point, the mobilization of the military along the borders with Israel and the Sinai border in Egypt, the tensions with Jordan as we speak. So I do think if this does occur, I do think Syria would comply, as reflected with the fact that they're silent about their strikes as well. There is no retaliation.
Israel doctor conducted an airstrike in Damascus. What was the main reason behind the airstrike, doctor, from your point of view? And how will this affect the security in Syria?
So one thing Syria is focusing on is Israel is focusing on, is building a buffer zone within parts of Syria to ensure that nothing occurs as close to what occurred the past 10 years with the mobilization of Iranian proxies and Assad's army, Hezbollah, and other Shia militias from all over the regions around those borders. So I think what Israel is trying to ensure now is to ensure a buffer zone between them as a state and their enemies as a whole within the region. And even if it's not enemies, it's to ensure their own defense regardless of who that enemy is or who is bordering them. And I think to ensure that, Netanyahu discussed recently the demilitarization, and I think we discussed this last week as well, the demilitarization of the Suwaida region, Dar'a region, and most parts of southern Syria. Now, if that occurs, I mean, that is first off, that is a breach of sovereignty of another nation state. And it's something that's quite unacceptable in international law. But again, it's the era we're heading towards, the age we're heading towards is one where the international law is going to be revealed as one that is dysfunctional somewhat. Some presidents, some leaders of states are taken to prison by the ICC and the Supreme Court, the International Court of Justice, And some other leaders are not taken into custody because they have power to not be taken into custody. Now, again, this is reflected, I think, in the fact that Israel is openly speaking about dividing the border of Syria by taking specific regions, and it has actually approached specific areas in Syria and taken over them beyond the Golan Heights borders that have been discussed since the wars in the 70s. Now, so one thing that is definite is the fact that Israel is ensuring that a buffer zone within the southern regions, and in order to ensure that, I think they're attacking with specific strikes on Damascus in order to ensure that they're actually serious about taking those specific goals and applying them within the region. So they do want and I think recent talks with the Druze leadership, recent talks with the Druze community in Syria, which are again quite volatile and quite confusing and still unpredictable, I think reflect this. So I think these strikes are linked to Israel's goals within southern Syria, and to ensure that they do want a buffer zone within that region. They do want demilitarization. They don't want to repeat what occurred the past 10 years, and they're actually serious about doing so.
Dr. Naif, today reports have emerged that the Syrian military have clashed with Hezbollah at the Lebanese border. So given the historical connotation between Hezbollah and the Syrian military, what do you think the clash will lead to escalation in the future?
It could possibly lead to clashes, of course. Now, we recently saw the past week the clashes between old forces of the Assad regime and pro-Assad supporters clashing with specific groups that are linked to the HTS. And this has, of course, led to an eruption of violence within the northwestern regions, with even mass graves and even what could be called, to a general degree, it could be called ethnic cleansings to a degree. I mean, it was quite violent and volatile. And this is what occurs when you get, again, it's the dark side of an ethnically and sectarian, sect-diverse region. And this is what occurs over here. And this is what I think could reflect the severity of the situation if it's actually spilled onto Lebanon, for instance, because even Lebanon is a reflection of the same diversity we see in Syria. The same diversity is also reflected in Lebanon, with a Shia population and a Sunni population, Christians, Druze as well over there. And again, if this spills over to Lebanon, it wouldn't be quite a pleasant sight. So this, considering this, I do think there would be specific skirmishes between these specific groups, not a fully fledged war. I do think that that Hezbollah is busy on the southern front with Israel, and I do think the Iranian proxies as a whole could be going through a big loss, and they are going through a big loss. And I don't think they'll really pose a threat to the HTS, considering their support with Turkey, Turkey's rise as a regional power, and Iran's own struggles with the USA and the Trump administration as we speak.
Now, Doctor, just to follow up regarding the diversity in Syria, as you know, the Syrian military are recruiting people, and so far reports have emerged that they are not recruiting Syrian Christians. So do you think that the discrimination faced by the other communities in Syria will lead to another civil war, another clashes in Syria?
It could definitely lead to that. Now, we're not too sure yet. One thing is, I mean, some signs show that we're not heading towards a civil war, but we're heading towards agreements. These tensions that occurred the past couple of weeks has led to almost instant talks and agreements with the Kurds, which is quite impossible. No one expected that to occur, yet it happened. Does that reflect to us? So which of the two, I think these two scenarios reflect to us what possible futures we have ahead. One where there's a uniform agreement between all groups, such as the case with the Kurds as we speak, or one where we have ethnic cleansing and mass genocide, as we saw with the Alawite regions in northwest Syria. The one thing is for sure, however, is Assad's regime, for instance, when you look at the civil war in Syria the past 10 years, we see Assad regime somewhat play this role as a regime that respects ethnic minorities, and they used this specific card across the civil war, and it actually led to a lot of benefits to the government as a whole. So again, they granted the Kurds autonomy for a while when they required the support of the Kurds, and they granted them autonomy for a long time, and they were being eventually they had specific agreements with the Kurds as well. They eventually also granted the Druze autonomy to a certain degree, and hence they got a bit more support from the Druze. And they played these cards every now and then, the Assad regime. Now, is it similar with the current regime? They still haven't. They don't have a specific. They don't have a specific agenda or a specific reflection of these specific successful ways of controlling this diverse situation in Syria, as the Assad regime did. Now, the clashes with the Assad regime primarily emerged with the Sunni groups around the northern regions, and that was the reflection of the map of the Syrian civil war across the past 10 years. You mentioned Christians now being excluded from the military apparatus. It's again one thing we need to, and this is something that's not really being spoken of the past couple of weeks and months since the recent developments in Syria, but we need to understand the background and the history and experience of such insurgents within or linked to the Syrian government as we speak. These are individuals with past that are linked to extremist Islamic groups. Even if, as Julani said, or Shara said, they renounced such ideologies that they adhered to in the past, and they're changed Muslims as we speak, or more moderate or so on. But I think the last attacks that occurred the past week in Syria reflect a different story. I mean, are these ghosts of the past, or are these still entrenched within those specific insurgents, within the government perhaps as well? And maybe something needs to trigger such ghosts to re-emerge within the political scene.
Speaking about ghosts, Trump has issued a travel ban to Syria twice. What do you think are the reasons why Trump issued travel ban to Syria, which is currently reeling with clashes and attacks?
As I mentioned earlier, there's a schism emerging right now between the European Union, Europe as a whole, and the US on one hand, and even Canada as part of the, we can consider them as part of Europe at this specific point. So this schism is reflected in their approaches to foreign policy and the Middle East as well, which is quite different, and there's a big disparity at this specific point. Sorry. Trump he has his own specific agenda and his own approach, and the administration, his own administration has an approach where there needs to be control of migration into the USA, and that is one of his main goals as the president at this specific point. And I think this is on one hand, this is one thing that explains this specific approach towards the Syrians. On the other hand, as we saw through J.D. Vance's tweets recently and replies concerning and comments concerning Syria and Syria's recent government, I think it reflects a bit of tension and a bit of a negative view towards the current government. And then this is one thing that is quite obvious with J.D. Vance right now. So I think they're not really on par with Europe here in terms of having really close and friendly relationships with the current Syrian government. And I think the recent the eruption of violence in northwestern Syria has, I think, exacerbated that even further.
Now, Doctor, it is estimated that the Assad regime has killed over 600,000 people. That's not a small number during the Syrian civil war. Do you think the ICC will issue an arrest warrant for Bashar al-Assad for war crimes and war against humanity?
That could be possible, yes, of course, that could be possible. And I think the thing is, he is currently in Russia, Assad is in Russia, and I think Putin is being chased to a degree by such international courts. The thing is, as I mentioned earlier, we're living in a world right now where political dynamics are quite different, where power is the main player, power is the main mechanism of moving politics. And if you do have power to defend yourself from such intergovernmental organizations, then you can do so. And We're not sure. I'm not too sure about Bashar al-Assad's future at this specific point, but we could expect such specific policies to be pushed forward, similar to Netanyahu's case as well. Definitely. I mean, these are specific individuals that have led wars, deadly wars, that have obviously led to repercussions, and part of these repercussions is the deaths of hundreds of thousands, or perhaps even in some cases millions of individuals from specific nations. And I think that this is what the trend usually with such rulers, and I think it's quite possible, definitely.
Thank you so much, Dr. Naif, for joining us, and also our correspondent, Abdi Hamid Ali, for taking your time to join us during the bulletin. We will hope to see you next week, Doctor.
Yes, definitely. Looking forward to that.
Thank you so much. And that's all for today at The Ambassador. Thank you for joining us as we debunk on the future of Syria. We uncover the latest development in our first segment. We'll continue to bring you updates on these stories and more as they unfold. Remember, this is The Ambassador, where we debunk global diplomacy and geopolitics. I have been your Ambassador, Susan Nganga. Good afternoon.
Everywhere